I put this in here, and we've used the same explanation quite a few times, so I apologise if you've seen it before, but it always makes me laugh. There's the long answer. The short answer is nothing. There is no difference. Absolutely diddly squat. The difference is the fact that a process mark is allocated to an AO3 type question. That's it. An AO3 being problem solving. And it's just worth knowing when you do see the mark, the process mark, that sometimes it could be an unfamiliar method. And that's all it is. It's still a mark. Because in my head, a process is a method and a method is a process. And it just came out with the new GCSE that they wanted a way of identifying, and it doesn't even mean it's on a 5-mark question every time. It's just on an AO3 style question. That is it. But it is the same type of mark. Right, biggest question is, they've gone straight to putting 3 on the answer line. Somebody will always say, if the answer's 3 and they've written 3 on the answer line, do I give them all the 4 marks? It depends on what the question says. And again, go back to what we said at the beginning about practice versus theory. In practice, what we might do would be different to the theory. And in theory, if working is required and they've just written the answer on the answer line, they will get no marks. And that will say at the beginning, you must show your answer. Use algebraic process. It is very clear. You must show how you work this out. Also, that is included in the word prove. There must be working out. And it doesn't mean there must be some kind of restatement of the question. It's got to be valid working out. You will see some of these in a minute. I hope that makes sense. So the question will say, show your working. And if there is a correct answer, they get nothing. Where the working's not required, i.e. it doesn't have the statement, show your working out, they will get all the marks that can be awarded for that question. Unless it's from an incorrect method. Again, you'll see one of these. But the idea, again, what we've said about where working is not required. So it might be, there's a load of stuff. It doesn't say show your working. They've got 4 on the answer line. In an exam, they will get the full marks for that question. If it doesn't say you must show your working. What we will do internally might be different. But again, you make sure it's consistent within a department. And then if the answer's not correct, you would look backwards and see where you can allocate the marks.
When you are on those internal assessments and that final bullet point there, this is where you can, and again, it's got to be across the department or across the mat or across a team, where you utilize your strengths and your knowledge of the mark scheme to benefit the students. So if you want the students to, again, it depends on the scenario you're in and the group that you're in and whatever, but we would, and myself and Mal are always very harsh on this, particularly when it's a 2-mark question or a 3-marker, we will be looking to possibly give nothing with the incorrect working to keep them on the right lines and having a conversation around that question with the students. And as they then develop into year 11 and the latter part of year 11, being a bit more honest with them in terms of the mark scheme. So it's about using your professional judgment and as a group and as what your department decide on how to keep those students on the right path, if that makes sense.
So this is a prime example. It doesn't say you must show all your working. It just says the mean length of 5 sticks. When you're looking at what the student has done, he's written 5 is 4.2 because there's 5 sticks. He has then said 7 and then just written 4 sticks. But the answer there is clearly 3.5. So if you see there, it says 3.5. It doesn't say you must show it's working. This has been classified as a problem-solving question, hence why it's a P mark, not a method mark. And so...
Just on that one there, that was the kind of question where we rumbled some students that they've remembered the 3.5 with no working out. And that's where you might want to use your judgment on whether you think some students have just remembered a number. And it's about forcing them to get their working out down. So with no working out, that's my point from before. You really want to think about how you are forcing them to get that working out down, particularly your boys.
So there's correct answer on the answer line. There's no working, but it still scores full for 3 marks because it doesn't say you must show how you got your answer. Then one to be aware of, and this is why you do have to check the working out and not just blindly tick. Were you to look at that and go, oh, it's 2 to the power of 6, 2 to the power of 6, award 2 marks. It is clearly wrong. Because what they have done is it's worth working through the questions with your colleagues and say, is there a way, what do we think they could have done here? We would hope to think that with a student doing that in the real exam, the incorrect working would be picked up by the online people that mark the scripts or us teachers that are sat there marking the scripts. It might fall through. Occasionally one might fall through, but you don't want to take the chance. There's obviously a misconception here. So addressing it with our students is the right thing to do.
Marking that speed, and it is at speed, isn't it? You want to mark them, you want to get the results back to the kids, that your eyes will just go to 2 to the power of 6. But that's where you're going to be doing the injustice and over marking and giving these results back to the students that are inflated compared to where they would be realistically going through the external assessment. So it's a massive learning curve. This is. It's so easy to look at the dotted line and go 2 to the power of 6, lovely, 2 marks. But you've got to look back at that work and it, like Mal said, it's a misconception. That is then a brilliant lesson starter, conversation, suite of lessons, whatever, just to go back and actually address what those issues are. And believe me, there is a lot more of these that go through that come out in the real exams. That it happens, and it happens a lot. You assume internally when you're marking, yeah, we're going to get them right, 2 marks straight away, it's got the right answer. But the examiners and those people who are marking those external exams at the end, they are trained, they have been through it. And the big thing to look back straight away, their eyes just don't look at the dotted line like it does when we mark internally. Their eyes go straight for that 4 to the power of 9 over 2 to the power of 3. And they will not get through the real exam.
Somebody's just said on the chat that's just popped up saying 1 mark. I assume there is nothing there that could give them the 1 mark because they've incorrectly evaluated 2 to the power of 5 times 2 to the power of 4 and then done 4 to the power of 9. Because they can't use the laws of indices, 9 minus 3 equals 6, because they're not the same base powers. So these are real examples from the November sitting. It just happens to be my handwriting that's been rewritten. This is quite an interesting one in terms of equivalent fractions, and it's a dividing fractions question. I think if you go through it, Siga, they're awarded M1 for correctly inverting the fraction. Then you've got your second M1 that comes from 18 over 5. Then, because we have seen the correct mixed fraction, i.e. 3 3/5, we can, in this case, ignore the subsequent working. But if we hadn't seen 3 3/5 and had only seen 18 divided by 5 is 3.6, we wouldn't have been able to award that final accuracy mark. So this is a case of the final accuracy mark is being awarded at 3 3/5, and we are ignoring any subsequent working. And that usually applies as well with if you look at the exact word into ISW right at the beginning, and we'll go back to it at the end about when it says something about not making it the specific criteria next to it. I don't know the exact, and I don't want to quote it without knowing the exact wording. So in this case, full marks would be awarded, even though we asked it for as a mixed number, because we've seen it as a mixed number. Now this one, again, be really careful when you're looking at it. It does say the answer's 120. Somehow they've got 120. but it comes from incorrect working. Absolutely nothing, because they haven't used the cosine rule at all. When you're marking loads of them, it's really easy to fall into the trap of, I'm just looking for 120. This was only part B that I was really interested in. And I don't know about you, Seeger, but I find the wordy ones about the explanations really difficult to see whether or not, do they fulfill the criteria about what's acceptable, what's not acceptable.
These are the hardest. They always have been. And when I keep calling it the new GCSE, it's not at all. In 2017, these were dropped in more as, I suppose, a deeper understanding question to something you've just done. So here, for example, you can see it's to do with area and then developing it a little bit more into the units. The other ones that seem to be almost every single sitting now is your answer an overestimate or an underestimate? Explain why. I find it really hard to teach it. I find it really hard to mark it. And that really does come through with my results plus analysis every single year, that we don't seem to do particularly well on the wordy ones. So I'm probably not the best one to ask on how to answer these or train people or support people on them, because it is really hard to particularly mark them now. This is what this session is about, because you're guaranteed a suite of answers in your class that probably match one in the whole class to one of those acceptable responses.
Yeah.
And you do then have to use your professional judgment on the way it's going. You generally will find, though, that most of them, the ones that are clearly wrong, do fall within the not acceptable responses. They generally do. So, for example, perimeter there is going to be a common one, or just she is correct, without giving the justification.
And then this one I particularly use, and go back to the ISW. So the exact wording on the ISW says that it's appropriate to ignore ISW when the additional work does not change the answer in a way that is inappropriate for the question or its context. It is not appropriate to ignore subsequent work, and this is the key, I think, when the additional work essentially makes the answer incorrect. So on the previous one, that despite them having then gone on to simplify it, they have simplified it correctly to 3.6. So it hasn't made the answer incorrect, but we have also seen the correct mixed number fraction there. And sometimes with these kind of sessions, we do find it's really hard to try to answer every question, because sometimes you're coming at it from different angles. But this particular one was to do with crossed out work. Essentially, any crossed out work, and the way I was trained going back a long time ago, and it took me a while because we were told that if it's crossed out and replaced, you just ignore it. If it's crossed out but not replaced, and it was just one of those things that. And it was, if it's crossed out, it's not there unless it's been replaced. Unless it's not, but see, I'm getting myself confused again now.
Yeah, if it's been crossed out and there's nothing else there, you can look at it.
Yes.
But if it's been crossed out and something else is there, you look at what else is there.
Yeah. And so this was put on there. And again, real students' examples. They haven't said, we could have in that case probably just using a professional judgment ignored the fact that she put brackets around it, but she had crossed out centimetre squared. She didn't, and the unit centimetre squared may have got them the marks, or would have got them the marks, but they'd crossed out centimetre squared, so we must ignore it. So they were 0. And it's the same with students. We will tell students, do not cross anything out.
Mm-hmm.
Let the marker make the call, unless you're 110% sure it's correct. Let the examiner be able to award you credit for the work that you've put in, which means you do not cross stuff out. We've then got something like trigonometry. You look at that, the answer, whilst the answer is 32, it says it's correct to 3 sig figs, but the answer within the range is seen in the working, so 32.21, and that's exactly what we would have done. We would have written the whole number down. And so we can ignore the subsequent working on the answer line in the fact that they haven't rounded it to significant figures to 3 sig figs, they've gone for 2 sig figs. But
I think you
again,
can, these questions, again, going back to the mark scheme, you can see at the bottom, always remember to look at the additional guidance. The additional guidance has come from these students that have come through the standardization process, been checked through, and the scenarios, like Mal said, thousands of these scenarios have come through, and you can see there, if an answer is given in the range, in the working and then rounded incorrectly, award the full marks.
yeah.
But you need to look at this on an individual case basis per question to make sure that that is what the question's saying, because there's slight variations of the wording that could mean something slightly different, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But this one here, it clearly says there additional guidance, and it is useful to glance your eyes down that additional guidance. Oh, lovely, Mel. That one.
And again, real students, and I've tried to copy it as just rather than use a student script. This particular one, it's obviously a quadratic graph. There is an attempt to draw a graph, and you'd look at it and go, I ain't giving that diddly. That's nothing, because I know my students can do better than that. But interestingly, when you go through it, this particular student, because you've got your 4, which was given, the zero's wrong, the -2 is correct, the zero's right, the 4 is correct. So they have got 3 correct values in their table, so they get 1 mark for the table. They have then plotted the -2, 4 correctly. They've plotted their -1, 2 correctly. They have plotted the 0, -2 correctly. They've plotted the 2, 0 correctly, and they've plotted the 3, 4 correctly. That's when the follow through mark came through in this case, because they plotted at least 4 points from the table were plotted correctly, including their incorrect ones. And it's just because they've already lost a mark for incorrectly calculating on the table, to then allow them not to get anything on the second would be unfairly penalising them twice. So just look out for those FT marks. And this will pick up on somebody else's question about incorrectly copying things down. You look at that, and when do we not ISW? This is a big one as well. We can see there in their working, they have clearly got 13y minus 1, which is the correct answer. But then I have on the answer line put 13y plus 1. So they got M1 for that. So the accuracy mark is not awarded at this point, because we don't award, and this isn't written down. It's part of the training that was delivered. Ignoring subsequent working or transcription errors are not allowed for accuracy marks in algebra, because what do we know? We may have assumed the actual student wants the answer to be 13y plus 1, which is obviously incorrect. So ignoring subsequent working isn't appropriate for algebraic sort of questions in terms of ignoring their subsequent working, or they may have just copied it wrong. It won't be allowed for these kind of questions. So this is paper 2, question 22 on foundation, but also question 1 on the higher. So it's a crossover question. They're awarded 1 method mark for dividing by 3 on both sides. There's an accuracy mark awarded. So the second accuracy mark is awarded there. If we hadn't have seen that G equals, and we had just seen F minus 11 over 3, they wouldn't have got that final accuracy mark, because the G is missing, if that makes sense. Now, this will definitely pick up on the fact about somebody asking us about what happens if they use the wrong number. So this isn't an algebra question, so there could be a transcription error. So by transcription error, we mean there's no hard and fast rule. It usually means like they've used a 2 instead of a 5, or a 3 instead of a 5, or they've appeared to truncate it. In the real thing, that kind of thing would get escalated to a team leader. So don't worry yourself about it. It does get dealt with. You say to team leader, I think they've copied this number down wrong. And then that gets marked by the team leader, or you get told by a team leader, award it this number of marks. But you've then going to come across this sometimes. We would mark it harshly internally because, again, it's about that sending the message. If you look for the second method mark here, they should have divided by 1.796, not by 1.79. And that was deemed to be a transcription error because they haven't made the calculation easier. And that is almost your definition for your transcription error, as long as it doesn't make the calculation error. And I think if Sebs can be kind enough to write into or copy it into the chat, the actual wording for what defines a transcription error or a misread. So in this case, it was seen to be, it would have been escalated to team leader, but we need to know what to do as a teacher, dealt with as a misread. But the final communication mark, even though we're saying, oh, that's okay, because it's obvious we know what he's doing. In order to get a communication mark, they can only be awarded if the values are correct. So this is the one that the vocal students go, oh, it's so unfair. I said Jake was wrong. Do I not get 1 mark for saying Jake was wrong? No, because GCSE marks are not awarded on a 50% chance of being right or wrong.
And it's Blake, not Jake.
Oh, is it Blake? I wasn't even reading that question, to be fair, but we've all had it. Miss, I said he was wrong, or I said he was right. I said no. It doesn't matter. It has to be or it has to be supported by some working out.
This is the perfect example question to really hit home with these students. And again, show them mark schemes, show them working out, show them answers, whatever it is the process to do with these questions and how you taught it. But emphasize, and it always comes from the chief examiner's notes, and they're interesting to read over every year as well. At the end of a sitting, they'll reveal the overall flavour of the year. And almost guaranteed every year, one of them is handwriting, illegible. And I know Mal put me down, not put me down once, but put me right once. She went, actually, I found one year where they've said handwriting was really, really good. But
no, handwriting was improved.
Handwriting, okay, improved this year, yeah. Okay, wasn't perfect. But organisation and getting the working, and the way Mal's laid that out there, it's obviously how the student has done it that Mal's picked out on this individual question, but that student has gone for organisation for the UK, clear, organisation for Australia, clear. The one thing we would do as a teacher is say, split your page, put a line down the middle, put your UK work into the left, put your Australia work into the right. And it's not only good for the examiner who's marking it, whether it's you internally or the external examiner, it's good for the student for when they want to go back over and check. Some of them do, believe me, they do go back over and check. They're looking at their work in an organised manner. And I say to my group now, what am I going to tell you to do with this question? And the first thing they'll say, split the page.
So somebody's asked about trial and improvement in the question. I haven't particularly looked at trial improvement as an example for this session because I'm just conscious of time. But something to be aware for algebra. So this kind of question where there's nothing there to say that it actually says on the third or fourth line, 5 times 4 minus 7 with 13 seen as the answer to award 1 mark. Sometimes that might not be explicit. But in this case, we can see that the answer is called, and some of the older mark schemes are really explicit about embedded answers. So I'm talking about probably 2005, may even be longer. I'd have to go and have a look. But some of the older mark scheme principles talk about embedded answers and that they can be awarded. So just look out for it. And I think the Pearson mark schemes have got a lot more detailed, so making sure that getting rid of the jargon about embedded answers and just said, well, that's what it would look like if it was an embedded answer. It would look like this, award them 1 mark. And that is almost I suppose, a trial and error, a trial and improvement, where they just know it, don't they? So it can be awarded. Then this one, My initial reaction when I looked at this was I would always teach the kids, right, you balance on both sides. You make it clear that you're adding 7 to both sides, not just add 7 to the other side, the side where it's moving. So if you talk about people tripping over the algebra bridge and the -7 becomes a +7, and it does need to be balanced. So that was the first lesson. But actually, it's one more than that. It needs to be balanced with the correct answer. So just adding 7 to both sides has to come out with the correct result, which is why, because what you see there is he actually took away 7, not added 7. So again, look and make sure that we're checking the working out. For most of your cases, they're hopefully going to get the right answer, or it will be blatantly obvious that they're going to get 0. So the times when you have to interrogate when you're marking internally, it's definitely worth making sure that you're either awarding marks correctly for this to give them the credit, or not awarding them correctly to give them it as a learning experience. So just writing that 7 on either side is not enough. It
I think this is
has
that
to be.
perfect. This is the perfect example of what we said earlier, where you'd look at 1.8, you'd go, right, that's incorrect. Let's go to the working out. Your eyes are drawn to the +7, +7. It's only out of 2 marks. So as soon as you see that +7, +7, your gut feeling is to go to give them the 1 mark. But you've got to spend that extra couple of seconds just to see actually the 16 add 7 is definitely not 9. So they haven't added 7 at all. So their balancing is incorrect, like Mal said, the evaluation.
So there would have been a time when I would teach it and we say, you have to balance it. You're going to get, because it's +7 and +7 is going to get you the marks, divide by 5, divide by 5. And if you don't get it, the +7, you'll get it for the divide by 5. But it has to be correctly evaluated.
The one scenario that obviously hasn't come through with the November sitting on the scenarios we've looked at is the one that I mentioned at the start that we'd share, that we were rumbled in last summers, when we were adamant on a student who was 1 mark off a grade 5, and we found the 1 mark, and we found the first line of the mark scheme, 160 seen. And we haven't got the scenario here to show you now. So we went for a review of marking, because there was 160, and that was the first mark in the mark scheme, 160 seen. It was a 4-mark question. There were 1 mark off a grade 5. That's it. We put it through. It came back as unchanged. So then we went to an appeal, costing us 150 quid, us as in the school. It came back and we were adamant, we're going to win this. The student's going to get it. Don't you worry. We've sorted this out. We've seen 160. They haven't spotted that. We're going to get this. And then it came back with the chief examiner's notes. And it completely, I don't know, just made me look a bit silly in front of the rest of the department, because I was so confident we'd
So
got
now
it.
you're telling 170 people.
Yeah, sorry. But the feedback from the chief examiner, and it was just it made me refresh again, go back and read the start of the mark scheme. The 160 was there, and that was what the first mark should have been given for, but his 160 then went through incorrect working all the way through.
So it was a
Oh no,
choice
sorry,
of
it wasn't,
method.
was it? It was, yeah, it wasn't used whatsoever. Sorry, the whole method that was there, the 160 was not thrown through his method to get to the final answer. So it was irrelevant. It was a relevant part of the steps. And you see there, for correct first step on the mark scheme. So it's being careful and reading the mark scheme prior to doing it. Don't just look at the answer. Don't just look at what the obvious things are throughout those steps. Read what it says each time. So yeah, we got rumbled completely on that. I say we. Can I say we? Or was it me?
Yeah, it's fine. And then in terms of, if you've never marked before, loads of you out there will have done this, and this is just, you'll have your own ideas, and I'd love to know if you've got a panacea for marking. But nobody ever said this is how you do it. And we're not saying whether it's the only way to do it. And it does make me laugh come mock season, when there's always the conversation about, oh, do I mark a page, a double page, or a whole paper? Personally, I'm a double pager. Flip it over, next double page, same. So the next student, flip it over, and then literally backwards and forwards like that. There is no fast way of marking, if we're being brutally honest. I've never found somebody who marks whole GCSE papers internally. And it'd be interesting if any of you, I just find it really hard. I think part of the reason markers now don't mark whole papers is that you build up a familiarization with a certain set of questions, and you become much more accurate at it. And I know that in the past we have, as a department, my previous school, where we split the papers. So one person did question 1 to 7 on all the foundations, another person did 11 to 15, and then somebody else did the rest. Lots of different things like that going on. People saying, I'll mark all the paper 1s for 2 sets if you mark all the paper 2s. So ways to try to alleviate the marking load within a department.
And I think that familiarization with the question is vital. And you will do it, I guarantee, or if you haven't, or if you've been around a while and you've been marking, you will have done this before. I guarantee at some point with a 4-mark, 5-mark question, no matter how confident you feel, you will get to a point, probably towards the end of that question or that number of students, and realize that actually I could have been awarded a mark for this, or I've been awarded a mark there where I shouldn't be. So it is about what you've done today, joined us here today to remind you to little things like that, that read every line of that mark scheme, because the last thing you want to do is go back through taking a mark off, or go back through adding a mark on, or rechecking all those questions, particularly those juicy ones where the kids like to leave loads of marking, loads of work, where a lot of it is wrong.
Then mark schemes, the best way I've ever seen mark schemes printed off has been, previous colleague of mine used to print them on A3. He used to print sort of 8 to a page. He'd go into PDF settings, 8 to a page, and he would have this massive A3 sheet of paper with little pictures on, because he didn't like the shuffling through, and he could sit there on his dining room table with this big sheet and just move it around the table. I personally mark with the scheme on my laptop open so I can scroll, but it frustrates me when I've got a double page spread and I have to click between pages. So once I've gone through it once, I write them down on a little piece of paper. Question 1 is 2. I write down the answers so I can, with a line between each double page spread. And then as I'm doing it, it's only then the odd question that you go, I don't know how to mark. I'll have to look at the mark scheme for that, because 90% of the cases will be the norm. Do you tick them? And I'd love to know what people do. Do you tick them? Do you circle them? Do you tally them? Do you write the marks? I've seen all sorts. I've seen people write, I'm going to circle the 2. I write numbers next to it. I don't use any particular colour pen. I don't use the same colour pen. I don't care. I just use a pen. And now this is the one that I'm really interested in. This might be a Twitter poll. There will be people out there that have been marking for a long, long time who remember the old Key Stage 3 SATs papers. And I think this is where it comes from. In the bottom right-hand box of each double page spread, so as you looked at a double page spread, then the bottom left-hand side, right-hand side, there was a box where you put that score for that double page spread. Nothing else, just that double page spread, which meant after you finished, you then had to go through and add up all your bottom right-hand corners.
Best way in the world. Best way to mark an exam paper, that is.
Or
I used to mark the old Key Stage 3 papers. That's exactly what it was. And that was my first exposure to it. And it stuck quite a few years later. Whereas some people out there have a little cumulative number, random number, when I'm looking at that exam paper, on the top right-hand corner of a double page to keep you going as you're working your way through. But yeah, it's
so
just
literally I mark and then I turn over to the next page, because I turn over to the new page as I'm going on. But before I flip it over, it's turned to the next set of questions. And on it is the cumulative score. So when I've turned over the last one and added my last, I know that score on there is 30, which I write in the front, and I'm done. I then haven't got to go through making sure I'm adding up all the scores. There you go. Lots of
But,
people, people have different views on it, and I get very passionate about it because I'm right.
This slide is to remind you of a couple of dates, launch events, the upcoming extended math certificate. Interesting times with what's the opportunity for this and where this can go with the students in your school. Please have a look at that and get signed up to those. And then when we approach June time, I think it is, June, there'll be the getting ready to teach events, which puts a bit more meat on the bones from the launch events. And I know myself and Mal are going to be part of the team to have a little look to offer follow-ups after the launch in terms of if any wants any further information on how it could work, models within the school, who's it aimed at, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, the new level 2 certificate, which is imminent, please take time to book yourself onto these. There you go, a bit more about it as well. But have a look, Google it.
No, and having looked at the some of the sample materials for the EMC, is it EMC? Yeah.
Yeah.
I quite like it. It looks quite interesting for your top end kids. There's definitely some challenging stuff in there that makes you think.
Well, it's
what you want.
yeah, and like going deeper into it, and those mathematicians out there that really are thinking about what the maths is, and what it actually, where it goes, what's it about, where's. We've got the next one of these. I've just got my planner here on the 6th of March. So session number 4, and I believe we're looking at methods in that one. That's the methods one. So we different ideas, methods, that can support you with different topic areas, or across topic areas, I should say. I hope that's been useful today. You can find the previous ones as recordings, as this will be, I think, within a couple of days' time.
Yeah, so there's some questions which I hope if we haven't answered them, there is some previous training slides that go into a lot more detail that for the summer 23 papers, the summer 22 papers. And if you have a look at them, I think they're in the Emporium as well as online. They then go through a lot of detail because they were much longer sessions and they were looking at specific papers, but they exemplify and they might give you bit more deeper understanding of some of the other general marking principles that we may not have had time to cover today. Or you just go, actually, let's just have a look at why. And they have some like a little delegate pack that you can work through. That means that you can go through and you can print it off, you can mark it, and then you can check it to see whether or not you would have got the same marks that were actually awarded to those scripts. So it's a bit more of an interactive session, even though it's not live people. Not that I'm dead, but the sessions were done live, but they're now recorded.